Viewers, what to make of Tipu Sultan? Is he the unifying nationalist he is made out to be in the countless TV portrayals of his storied life? Is he the relentless harrier of the British we have come to know through our history books? Does he deserve to be placed on a pedestal as he has been for much of independent India's recent history? The quest for the truth about Tipu has been joined by Vikram Sampath, who is famous for having written the most authoritative treatise on the life of another Indian icon, Veer Savarkar. In his 900-page rollicking and accessible biography of Tipu Sultan, full of anecdotes, Vikram Sampath takes us down a series of twisty paths in the search for the truth about Tipu. So what actually has he found? To talk a little bit more about the scholarship and Tipu Sultan, let's go straight across to Vikram Sampath. Mr. Sampath, thank you very much for speaking to me. It's a pleasure. This is yet another tome that you have assiduously written, 900 pages. Could you first of all just hold it up for our viewers so they get a sense of what this immense body of work, pun intended, is all about? There it is, viewers. That's on your screens. You can see it. It's almost a doorstop, actually. You can use it as a pillow if you want, but more importantly, it is your window to the life and times of Tipu Sultan. It is also your window to a great deal of facts that haven't been yet known about Tipu Sultan. And let me tell you, Vikram Sampath is the man to go to. Now, Vikram Sampath, first of all, let's start with the brass tacks, so to speak. When was this book written? What was the inspiration? How long did it take you? Clearly, this is not overnight. Clearly, this is not 3 months. Clearly, this is not 6 months either.
Yeah. Thank you, Rahul. Such a pleasure always to talk to you. And I think in-depth conversations on matters of history, I've enjoyed always having them with you. This book, certainly, as you mentioned, it's not something that came up all of a sudden. The book has been in the making in my head for now close to perhaps 15 years. Quite ironically, my foray into literature and historiography was thanks to Tipu Sultan. There was a very famous serial those days on Doordarshan, if you remember, called The Sword of Tipu Sultan, where Sanjay Khan played the lead role. And that serial led to a lot of disturbances in different parts of the state that I come from, Karnataka. Because in their attempt to glorify Tipu and his father Hyder Ali, who actually usurped the throne of Mysore from the Hindu rulers, the Wadeyars, the producers of the serial tried to show the royal family in an extremely poor light. The Maharaja was shown like an obese retard who was dancing with the court dancer, the Maharani, like one of those typical, vamps from an Ekta Kapoor serial, all the time conniving and conspiring. And there were lots of protests in different parts of Karnataka. I'm talking of the 1990s. And if you remember, even the studio caught fire, and I think Sanjay Khan's face got burnt and so on. And there were lots of murmurs in Kannada media here that it is the curse of the Wadeyar for the kind of portrayal that he had given to him. And so, as I was probably a boy of 12, 13 years of age who really hated history in the manner in which it was taught in schools, but these protests, these talks of all these curses and all of that, I don't know, it kindled something in me, and from there on began a completely self-motivated and a self-funded initiative to get on to the discovery of the truth about just that one king and queen who were misrepresented in the serial. And soon, over a course of 10 years, it expanded to the entire Wadeyar dynasty, who ruled for 600 long years, one of the longest reigning royal houses in India. And one section of the book was on the Interregnum period, or the intermission, the interval between where a legitimate government is disposed and a usurpation occurs. And that was the 40-year interregnum from 1760 to 1799 by Hyder Ali and later his son Tipu. That was a small section of the book. Now, I was still a babe in the woods. I was probably 26, 27 when this book came out. A couple of talks I was giving in Bangalore about Tipu Sultan and the Interregnum era, and I was reading out letters that he wrote to his own officers, where he's very clearly mentioning, go to Calicut, destroy, so many temples, destroy churches, kill infidels. I was just quoting it verbatim, and that led to a huge ruckus in the hall. Some people disrupted the event. One of them even, and the event had to be, aborted. I was ushered backstage, and my poor father was sitting in the audience, and someone went and thrust a letter or pamphlet or something in his hand and said, "You have only one son, and so, if you want him to live long, please ask him to mind what he speaks." And a couple of weeks later, there was some article I wrote about the divans of Mysore, in which there was a reference to Tipu, and that led to protests again. And right in the heart of Bangalore, in MG Road, I remember my effigy also being burnt by some of the protesters. Now, obviously, we at home were not prepared for something like this, and my parents, particularly my mother, was extremely hassled about this, and she extracted a promise from me that I'll never talk about Tipu Sultan in public. Of course, I kept my promise to her till the time she was alive. We unfortunately lost her in 2018, and since then this book has been re-germinating in my mind. And it took me around 4 years later to revisit all the sources that I was already familiar with about Mysore history, to revisit them, go deeper into that, and that's how this book came out. It's been a labor of love, something that's been brewing in my mind for long. I know I've broken my promise to my mother, but now that she's not around in flesh and blood, I can only hope and pray that from whichever heaven she is in, she will protect me against any kind of unintended, harm or consequence that I might face after this book comes out.
Well, first of all, sorry about your loss, but fundamentally, you're seen as an author who redeemed the image of Hindutva icon Veer Savarkar, and that was a masterful exposition over 2 volumes, and you rescued him from this sort of, if I can say, pejorative sort of narrative woven by the left to discredit his image, etc. Now you've turned your attention to an individual who the left has built up again in our minds. Do you worry that your scholarship on Tipu will be dismissed as an attempt at misrepresentation?
I mean, people can always say what they wish to say, but as you have also seen, Rahul, almost 200 pages of the book, of this very mammoth tome, is footnotes and references. So for every claim that I make, there is a backstory, there is a source, and I think that is a historian's biggest shield or protection. And in my case, irrespective of what the outcome or what the dismissals or the attacks that might come or might not come, they don't matter much to me anymore. I think as long as my conscience is clear, and my clear and only adherence to the craft of my profession of being a historian, as long as I adhere to that and illuminate the archive, that is what a historian needs to do. Over the last 4 years, while I revisited most of these sources, I made several trips to archives across India and also outside, whether it was in London, the British Library, the India Office Library there, Paris and other places, and there's copious amount of documentation around him, his various communications with people. And Tipu was a very, very prolific writer. Unlike his father, who was illiterate, he was very well read, and so he wrote copiously. So we get a lot of first person account in Persian. For a brief while, I even tried to learn Persian myself so that I could read the original manuscripts. That ended in a bit of a disaster, so I rather used the help of a translator. So most of these are primary source materials in Persian, in Marathi, the Peshwa Daftar documents, which have a lot of correspondences between Pune and Mysore, which happened in those troubled years. And the 18th century, Rahul, is an extremely important one, which we sometimes gloss over. It's a century of chaos. You had 2 major powers, so to say, having collapsed by then. One is, of course, the death of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj towards the end of the previous century, and the death of Aurangzeb. And with this, the centrifugal forces had dissipated in the Indian polity, and in its place came lots of principalities, all vying for independence, be it the Nizam in Hyderabad, the Nawab of Awadh, Bengal, the Marathas later under the Peshwas emerging as a main force. So it was a theater of the of chaos, of the absurd, and in that you also have the European parts, the Dutch, the Portuguese, and of course the British and the French muddying the waters. So to zoom into this very important century, which I think holds a lot of lessons for us, because that was the century when India capitulated and we had the onset of British colonialism. So a lot of revisiting of this era is important, and that is what I've tried to do in this book, completely based on facts, keeping my own whatever predispositions or prejudices, if any, aside. And that is how I think objectively a historian needs to, as I said, illuminate the archive for a general public who may not be either interested or well versed in accessing sources in their original.
So now let's get into the substance of it. 300,000 words, and almost a third, just shade under third of the book is devoted to Tipu's father Hyder Ali. Now clearly this was a conscious choice on your part. Why did you spend so much time introducing us to Hyder Ali?
Yes, in fact, I wanted that as a separate volume, in fact, because it was just so. Hyder's is a fascinating story. As you've read, he was someone who, from rags to riches, literally building his, his career, his life, his empire brick by brick. His ancestors are supposed to have migrated from somewhere in the Afghanistan, Punjab, and so on, and settled down later, first in northern Karnataka, where his father Fateh Muhammad was, serving the Nawab of Sira. And the father dies prematurely and owes money to a debtor, and to actually recover the debt, the person puts Hyder and his elder brother Shahbaz into these kettle drums and has them beaten upon and so on. And in such a piteous situation, the Maharaja of Mysore takes pity on these fatherless boys and pays the ransom to release them. So from that situation, in 12 years, if you see the arch of his career, he ran with the hare, hunted with the hounds, a typical Machiavellian kind of politician, ruthless, only driven by this thirst for power and for climbing the ladders of power in Mysore. In 12 years, he manages to overthrow and usurp the throne of his own benefactor, the Maharaja of Mysore, and becomes the Sarvadhikari, or the supreme dictator of the kingdom. Now, this is a story in itself, which intertwined also with the politics of the time that I mentioned, the Carnatic wars that raged in South India, the wars of succession where Hyderabad, Arcot, and all these kingdoms were using Europeans and other Indian powers in their internecine squabbles. And as a result of all of this, the only person who made the maximum hay while the sun shone was Hyder Ali. And so I think his story becomes a very important foil to that of Tipu Sultan. Once you see Hyder, and you actually, as a biographer of both father and son, I would probably rate the father much higher, because he was a man who actually strove so hard to build this kingdom, build his own kingdom, and he knew how to maintain that as well. So this was a very important feature of the father. The son got it all on a platter and eventually ended up losing it, thanks to only his foolhardiness, his lack of foresight, the sense of hubris, arrogance, and that whole intoxication that power and absolute power brings to a person.
There is a very interesting contrast you draw between these two. So Hyder Ali was ruled in a sort of inclusive Ottoman tradition, if I might use that analogy. He seemed to be someone who was keen to build bridges between different sections of the population. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's the sense I got.
Yes, indeed. In fact, he understood that he was a usurper, and usurper of a throne of a much loved king of a Hindu majority kingdom. So to openly and overtly impose Islamic tenets or traditions and culture, he knew would upset his political setup. So he was very conniving that way. He kept the Wadiyar as a puppet ruler, and he was a titular, the regent of the throne, so to say, but everybody knew where the real power lay of the kingdom. So trophies of war would be submitted to the Maharaja's feet, proclamations would come out in the Maharaja's name, but everyone knew this was only a titular puppet, and the actual power was in Hyder's hands. And particularly about the Hindu majority, there are lots of eyewitness accounts of the time who talk, including a historian, Hayavadan Rao, the Mysore historian of the early 20th century, who says though Islamic by birth, Hyder was almost by temperament and by every other measure a Hindu, because he did not really upset the apple cart within Mysore. There's a very interesting anecdote which I'd like to share. The famous Ranganatha Swami temple in Srirangapatna used to have this annual procession where the idol is taken around in a procession in the city, the Ratha. And it passed the seminary of a Islamic scholar, and he and his students, like what happens now, a lot of them gathered and started pelting stones at this procession. So the procession had to be dismantled, but the Hindus regrouped next day, came in larger numbers with weapons and clubs and so on, and managed to go past that road. Now the Pirzada of the seminary was extremely perturbed by this. He goes to Hyder and complains, and Hyder listens to the whole case, and then he tells him, who was the first person who pelted stones? And he says, yeah, we were the ones, because we hate idolatry and it has to be abolished from this kingdom. And how dare idolatry rules in a kingdom that is ruled by a Musalman? And so Hyder retorts back saying, who told you that this kingdom is ruled by a Muslim? And if you have pelted the first stone, be ready to face the music from the other side. And he dismisses this guy. The Pirzada is so upset, he goes away to Madras. Later he's disillusioned there and tries to come back to Mysore, but he's prevented entry by Hyder. So just this one incident tells you a lot about this man who let things be. As long as he had the power in his hands, matters of faith did not mean much to him. There's another eyewitness account of this German missionary called Schwartz, Frederick Schwartz, whom the British sent to Hyder just before the Second Mysore War. And he also writes copiously that, I was free to talk about my faith to anybody in the kingdom. He even conducts Sunday masses to several officers and so on. And he says Hyder doesn't seem to care at all about, religion, of his own religion or others. He was not even a very great practicing Muslim. He did everything which went quite against the tenets of Islam, including being quite intoxicated to alcohol and several other sensual pleasures that he gave into. So the picture that comes out of Hyder is one of someone who understood the real politic of how religion, if it is imposed on a populace which you needed to control and which did not share your faith, you needed to be circumspect, otherwise be ready to even lose power. In fact, the Dutch governor also reports that Hyder had banned the killing of cows and bullocks in his kingdom because the Hindus considered it to be sacred. So we see a contrast in the religious policy too between father and son, and that's why I think you can't understand Tipu and how good or how bad he was if you don't keep the father, Hyder Ali, as a foil to see what worked in his case and why Tipu actually went wrong in just the 17 years that he ruled.
So it's very interesting, because I was reading that he spoke Kannada, Marathi, Telugu, Tamil with fluency, but had no knowledge of Arabic and Persian. Now that is very surprising, isn't it? I mean, given his...
Yes. Indeed, I think he was illiterate. The troubled circumstances of his childhood didn't give him the luxury of an education, and it's said that the only literary achievement in his life was to learn to sign the first alphabet of his name, which was her. So other than that, he had no learning, but he had an elephantine memory. He almost could assess a person by seeing face reading kind of a capability that he had. Very, very astute, very strategic in his thinking, and that was precisely what he bemoaned in his son. And there are copious documentations of that. Now, since he did not get the best of education, he wanted his sons Tipu Sultan and the younger one called Karim to get the very good, well-rounded education, and he puts them under a Maulvi to teach him about kingship and warfare and all of that. And 2 or 3 years after that, he just suddenly conducts a surprise mock examination of Tipu Sultan, and he's aghast at what he sees, and he's supposed to have lost his temper so badly at both his son and his teacher that what kind of rubbish are you teaching my son? If this is all that he learns, he will grow up to be a religious bigot and a zealot, because and he'll become a good Maulvi, but he won't be a great ruler. You have not taught him anything of statecraft or warfare, of diplomacy and anything. Just learning the scriptures is not going to make him a great king, and he dismisses that Maulvi. So this also says, so he always actually, if you see the father-son dynamic also, I don't think he thought too highly of his son.
Yeah, and there are a lot of letters,
where
isn't it, that they sort of exchange letters. So tell us a little bit about this, because these letters are fascinating and you've actually reproduced them, almost verbatim, obviously translations.
Yes.
But yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So in fact, there is in the palace of Tipu Sultan after his death in Srirangapatna, when the British searched the rooms, they found this long letter which was like in the form of an agreement which Tipu had signed, and there was a royal seal and all of that, and it was in Persian. It had 8 articles, and that's quite a revealing document, where he's made this pledge to his father that if I, and also said, if I do this, this is the punishment I'll be liable for. If I conduct theft, then I can be flogged. If I actually indulge in any kind of conspiracies against the throne, then I can be strangled, I can be executed. So from petty crimes to graver ones of conspiracy and all of that, there was a wide range of things that Tipu actually had to take an indemnity for against with his father, which meant to say that the father really did not trust his son. This is dated around 1770, and this was also the time when, in the battle of Chinkurli against the Marathas, when Madhav Rao actually defeated Hyder all the 3 times that he invaded Mysore. And in this particular battle, when Tipu tries to not comply to the wishes of Hyder, he actually takes a big cane and flogs his son in public, in front of everyone. And Tipu is so incensed by it, he dashes his turban and sword and throws a tantrum and runs away, saying, I'm not going to participate in this war anymore, and so on. There are also documentation of corporal punishments that he gave to his son. Now, as I mentioned earlier, he had made the cow and the bullock and all that as sacred animals which could not be sacrificed, but his son was very interested or fond of hunting down bulls, and for this he was actually put in solitary confinement for a few days, where not even one human being could talk to him. And so a lot of father wounds that Tipu seemed to have, and in fact even William Kirkpatrick, who actually translated several of these documents, he mentions that possibly this very harsh punishments that the father gave to the son, that is what, psychologically speaking, so to say, made Tipu such a cruel person as he grew up, who could not take any kind of failure, and for even the smallest of mistakes, the punishment would be very, very intense.
So how do you attribute Tipu's, I suppose it's a zealotry, how do you contrast that to his father? So is it because Tipu found himself being raised by people who were perhaps extremely austere and were not fond of the sensual pleasures of life, were very pious? Is that, I mean, must have been something that made Tipu predisposed towards this sort of austere and extremely conservative point of view?
I think the seeds of bigotry and this kind of strict adherence to tenets of your own faith were laid or sown in his mind in his childhood because of this teacher and so on. And he was, as I said, a very prolific writer and a reader. So he read a lot. In fact, from his palace after his fall, the British got thousands and thousands of books in several languages, largely Arabic and Persian. He was well versed in these languages. He would read a lot, but a lot of these books too from his library, while they are of other things, astronomy and physics and history and so many poetry and all of that, several books are about jihad, about what a mujahideen needs to do. In fact, one of his attendants, Abdul Shustri, he actually writes this book called Fathul Mujahideen, which details the detail of how a mujahideen should actually conduct a jihad. So I think somewhere when the father was away in battle and so on, the son seems to have absorbed a lot of this, the austerities of the faith. And immediately after coming to power in 1782, the first 5 years for him were a dream run. It was a dream that any ruler could have. He concluded the Second Anglo-Mysore War, which was midway through somewhere, and his father had died in the middle of the war, he conducted it superbly to his advantage with the Treaty of Mangalore, which actually was the last document where an Indian power had an upper hand over a European power. So that was a great success. He had managed to vanquish the Marathas during their subsequent attacks on Mysore, because Pune was in turmoil. Madhav Rao had died, and you had the whole Barbha is there after Narayan Rao's assassination and so on. So he managed to vanquish the Marathas. All the smaller rebellious Palegars, Coorg, Malabar, he managed to vanquish all of that. Internal sabotage, he managed to vanquish that. Attempts by the displaced royal family to dispossess him, that also he managed to subdue. So this huge sense of I can do nothing wrong, the hubris, the arrogance that came in, that is a story in itself. In fact, there are a couple of anecdotes where his followers and army men tell him not to proceed forward because they expect a cloud burst, and he pompously says, you think I cannot command the clouds to stop their thunder on me? I can do that. But then sadly for him, the clouds actually burst, and there was huge rain in which the entire army got stuck. But that apart, he had this highly bloated self-image. In fact, Colonel Mark Wilkes, who's a historian of Mysore history, he documents instances where Tipu even goes to the extent of being so blasphemous as to compare himself with the Holy Prophet, and in some cases even think that he is better than him. So when someone gets into this kind of megalomania and thinks that religion is that aid to come your way, I think downfall is also very, very imminent. To me, Tipu's story is like a classic Greek tragedy. Somebody who gets the power, the joys of sovereignty on a platter from his father, who's worked so hard for him, and because of these kind of negative attributes, you actually squander it away bit by bit, and in the course of 17 years, you dig up your own grave, and you bring misery both for yourself as well as your future generations who lost power thereafter.
That's interesting, because you obviously paint Tipu as this individual who was quite obsessed with carrying out jihad, etc., who was quite given to a certain piety and committed excesses, and you have detailed them, which we will talk about. But somehow in the Indian imagination, it's Aurangzeb that figures as the real iconoclast, so to speak, when it came to Hinduism, Hindu temples, etc. But Tipu wasn't very far behind. How is it that the Tipu story sort of got extrained from the mainstream, and Aurangzeb became the linchpin of this?
Yeah, I think Tipu was the Aurangzeb of the South. I think numerous reasons why I think these aspects of Tipu did not come out, though I'm sure everybody knew about it. At least in Karnataka, people knew. The South doesn't feature so large in the larger narrative of Indian history. We are so Delhi-centric in our approach. So I think every little detail about Delhi, its rulers, all of that gets the larger, audience. The South, you cherry pick what you want. The other is the manner in which, of course, our history has been written post-independence, where all these uncomfortable truths, which are real facts of history, we labor under some false misapprehension that talking about these truths will somehow upset the social cohesion of India today, that communities today will feel upset if you mention these things, which are a fact of life. You can't wish away your past. You can't whitewash it or say these things never happened because you think it is uncomfortable. And ideally, the Muslims of Karnataka or the Muslims of India need not think of Tipu or Aurangzeb as their hero. He was as barbaric as anybody could be. So if he was a villain for the Hindus and Christians of South India, he should be considered as much of a villain for the others too. Now, and I think popular media was employed in a wonderful manner to build this image of Tipu. You had, as I mentioned, the sword of Tipu Sultan. I think that was the main, window to most Indians today to understand this man, the hero worship of the man, that very, marchy tune of the title music. That is what comes to people's mind when they talk about Tipu Sultan. And the fact that I think he fought the British, that also kind of redeems him or somehow saves him from his horrendous social report card. Just because you fought against the British, that doesn't take away all the other negatives that your very stormy rule has had. Post independence, I mean, this is the common narrative even in popular media, whether it is cinema and so on. The British is always the bad guy, and the Indian who's the subaltern, so to say, the David and Goliath fight, where the Indian is fighting against the British. So anybody who does that is the hero. But truth be told, in the two wars that Tipu actually fought himself against the British, he lost both of them, and lost them horribly. The 4 Anglo-Mysore wars that were fought, the first 2 were fought under his father Hyder, where Mysore scripted unprecedented victory. The first Anglo-Mysore war, in fact, Hyder goes to the very gates of Madras. The British could have been exterminated from India at that point. He makes them sign an extremely humiliating treaty, something that makes sends shockwaves back in London. The stock prices of the East India Company tumbles down and all of that. The court of directors are so livid with what the company has been doing. The second Anglo-Mysore war too, where Tipu of course played a very important role in both these wars as a deputy to his father. In fact, there is the Battle of Polilur during the course of the second Anglo-Mysore war, where he defeats this man called Colonel Bailey, which is painted actually at the Darya Daulat Palace of Srirangpatna. It's called the Lali Bailey Yuddha. So there the entire, it's like a propaganda art about how Bailey is shown as this very effeminate person sitting in a palanquin, twiddling his thumbs and so on, and these two are the macho men who are riding their elephant and horse and defeating him. Sir Hector Munro, who was the hero of the Battle of Plassey, Buxar, defeated the Mughal, the Nawab of Bengal, the Nawab of Awadh. He literally throws away all his guns and ammunition in the water tank in Kanchipuram and runs away to Madras to save his life. So that was the terror which Hyder could actually instill, in his opponents, and Tipu learnt those tricks of the war very well under his father. So that's why he managed to conclude the second Mysore war with a lot of positive gains to himself. The Treaty of Mangalore, as I mentioned earlier, in 1784. But after that, it was a downhill. So the 2 other wars he fought himself, the third Anglo-Mysore war with Lord Cornwallis as his opponent, he lost half his kingdom. He had to give war indemnity of about 3.5 crores, for which he also had to pledge away his 2 sons, Abdul Khalik and Muizuddin, as hostages to the British. And then of course the last Anglo-Mysore war against Richard Wellesley, who decided that let's take it to the kill and the finish, and the final Anglo-Mysore war, where he was killed in Srirangapatna on 4th May 1799. So even if we look at this heroism against the British narrative, actually Tipu was not somebody who won any war against them when he independently fought those. Under the shadow of the huge banyan tree that his father was, he certainly made a lot of gains. So I think a lot of story, the popular story, the folklore around Tipu has been couched in so much of grandiose narrative that the real Tipu really struggles to come out in front of our eyes.
Well, there's this very interesting exchange between Tipu and his mother, which is quite instructive and gives you an insight into how deep, into how sort of he was evolving as a person and a monarch. This is an interesting exchange.
Yeah. Yes. In fact, this mother of his, Fatima or Fakhrun Nisa, as she was variously called, she was a very, very authoritative woman. In fact, there's a very funny anecdote that Hyder, while he was this terror-inspiring, macho man that he was, not only in India but even outside, he was extremely scared of his wife. So he would go with a lot of trepidation to her chambers, and she would give him such a tongue lash, and he would come running away, and then he would have this drunken revelry with his friends, where he says, I find it so much more easier to fight the British than face my wife's tongue. So she was this very controlling, authoritative woman, and she had her influence on her son too. Tipu was swayed by her all the time. In fact, including the the choice of the girl he had to marry. Hyder had a choice, but the mother overruled that and brought a girl of her own choice, and finally, of course, Tipu ended up marrying both, but the mother kind of always prevailed. So the anecdote you're referring to is much after Hyder's death, when in the open court, we have this very interesting man called Purnaya, who was the Diwan. He was a very close confidant of Hyder, but also continued under Tipu. A very astute, very able, diplomat of sorts. Now, in the open court, Tipu makes an offer to him saying, you're such an intelligent person, why don't you join us and convert to Islam? Now, Purnaya, being the artful badger, somehow, hurriedly says, yes, Sahab, as you please, and so on, and he makes a hurried entry. The mother is actually sitting behind in the women's section behind the parda, and she's supposed to have come out and given her peace of mind to Tipu, saying, your father never did this kind of thing. If you embitter people and lose the confidence of your near and dear, then your ruin is not too far away, so you better mend your ways. So she gives him that advice, but obviously that advice fell on deaf ears, because that was basically the reason why he lost out so many of his confidants. This overtly overt push for religious conversion and so on, and adherence to Islamic tenets, all of that led to him losing the confidence of so many people, particularly the Hindus. And after the loss in the Third Anglo-Mysore War particularly, his confidence in the Hindus, particularly the Brahmins, almost evaporated. And so he put his entire army and administration with Muslims and only Muslims, and even if they were illiterate, it did not matter to him. There were all kinds of fanciful manner. In fact, Wilkes and other historians document how he would just the interview to select someone to a very important position in the army or the navy or the administration would be, okay, that man with the long beard, I think he should be inducted. Okay, this person wearing a green turban, he should be become the chief of navy. So without even going into the details of whether that person was able to take this position, this was the kind of, as I said, arrogance, you could call it, or lack of foresight, and this overt obsession with religion, which his mother repeatedly warned him against, which he did not heed to, and that is what led to his eventual downfall.
So far from the nationalist and integrationist that he has been painted out to be for most Indians, he wasn't. I mean, yes, he might have opposed the British, etc., but that was more out of expediency, because the British were actually testing the limits. But he had opened a line to the French. There are a large number of letters that you've reproduced that showed that he was, if it hadn't been the British, it might have been the French, quite frankly. And this doesn't square with the image of a nationalist hero, does it?
Indeed, yeah, when we talk of him as being a freedom fighter and so on, I think it's just so bizarre that we make such claims, because both father and son Hyder also had employed the French, and this was post the Carnatic Wars, Dupleix and Robert Clive and that era. A lot of French people made their way to the Mysorean polity as very important allies for Mysore under Hyder, and that continued with Tipu. Now, I would really credit Tipu with one thing, which was his understanding of global geopolitics. Now, he understood that these deals that he was signing with the French governor in Pondicherry or the British governor in Madras, that did not even carry any worth. It was not worth the paper it was written on, because all these treaties would go for ratification back to London or Paris or Batavia if it was the Dutch. So what he wanted to do is directly deal with the supreme power there. So for the first time, you have an Indian monarch sending embassies to various countries. So right from 1785, 86, you have embassies being sent out to Constantinople, to Turkey, to France. So he sends a huge embassy to Emperor Louis XVI in France, while he is actually right in the thick of the French Revolution and all the chaos that was going on in France, to enlist support against the British. And as you rightly said, the French were no less colonial than the British in their designs or their intentions. It took us a lot more time to redeem Pondicherry than it did for the rest of India. So we would have been a French colony, if not a British, had Tipu won. Now, along with soliciting the French, what is even more dangerous is his soliciting the Ummah, the larger Muslim Brotherhood, playing up on religious sentiments. Now, all through, both Hyder and Tipu were deeply aware of the fact, and they had a sense of inferiority in them, that they were not legitimate rulers, they were usurpers. So they try every kind of thing to get legitimacy for their rule. So first you send emissaries to the Mughal emperor Shah Alam, saying, recognize me as the real ruler. I am truly Islamic in my beliefs and in my actions. I am following the Shariat. So recognize me as a ruler. But the Mughal himself is so powerless, he is unable to do anything. Tipu then sends emissaries to the Caliph, the the head of the literal virtual head of the Islamic world. And this is what the Lodhis, the Tughlaqs, the Khiljis and various Nawabs of the past used to do. They used to get legitimacy for their rule with the Caliph. It was only the Mughals who did not depend on the Caliph for their rule. Now Tipu does this also. He sends letters there saying legitimize me, recognize me, and he actually gets that farman from the Caliph saying you are a very pious Muslim and you have stuck to the tenets of the faith, and so I give you the permission to rule Mysore. So you are ruling a province in India with the help of a foreign power, and you are also asking military aid from the Islamic world against the British. Closer to his death, there are copious letters between him and several of the Muslim world leaders, whether it is Zaman Shah, the Durrani ruler of Afghanistan, where he says invade India, and there is a clear cut plan of action. The invasion was to happen in phases over 2 years. First, the North India was to be completely washed off from the infidels, the kafirs, and then South India to be completely flushed out from all these evil kafirs who don't believe in the true religion. And then both of them were supposed to meet and then divide the whole of India amongst each other as an Islamic caliphate. So you are asking a foreign power to come invade your country and establish an Islamic caliphate. What kind of freedom fighter is that who does this? He writes letters to Napoleon. He sends emissaries to Mauritius, to the Isle of France there, asking for help against the British. He sends emissaries to the Shah of Persia, to the Sultan of Turkey. All of them, wherever, when it was a Muslim ruler, he would appeal to the religious sentiments, ask for the establishment of a caliphate in India. For the French, it was playing to their rivalry against the British. So much so that there is another, it's again a Greek tragedy where he foolishly trusts this man called Ripaud, who is an impostor who comes to Mysore. All his officers warn him against trusting Ripaud. Ripaud says, I am a very senior official in Mauritius and I can help raise 10,000 people for your fight against the British. Now he trusts him. He starts a Jacobin club in Srirangapatna, and that's the theatre of the absurd of the worst kind. In fact, even a favorable biographer like Dennis Forrest, he actually claims that at this particular point, Tipu's story actually becomes a literal joke where he's afflicted by mental blindness. In the Jacobin club, there is a tree of equality which is planted. He's called Citizen Tipu, and this cap of equality is worn. They all sing the French national anthem and all of this. All of this is happening. He trusts Ripaud. They sends lots of presents and money and all of that with him and his emissaries to Mauritius. And out of 10,000 people, only 99 people actually come back to Mysore to help him. But those become important evidence for the British, especially Wellesley, to show that you are conspiring to eliminate our power. We have documentary evidence of your correspondences with Zaman Shah, with Mauritius, with Napoleon Bonaparte. Most of those letters are intercepted by the British, and so we are well within our rights to flex our muscles to eliminate someone who wants to eliminate us. And that is how the final Mysore war ushers in. So this internationalist Tipu, while on the one hand it is, as I said, a positive thing that someone saw this geopolitics, indulged in diplomacy, he created a market for Mysorean products in several countries, especially Muscat and Oman and all these Middle Eastern cities and so on. But the tag of being a nationalist or a freedom fighter for India, I don't think the facts of history support that adjective at all.
Well, I mean, just to be fair, I suppose at one level, this business of the enemy of my enemy is my friend has played out, of course, in Indian history, quite long. And we've seen it with some very stellar individuals who were genuine freedom fighters who tried to sort of, balance this, that, the other. And we know that. But fundamentally, look, there was state-sponsored apartheid. There was this whole enterprise of changing the name of cities as they existed. There were so many things that are pretty obvious which are hiding in plain sight. Now, taken all of this together, this sort of bigotry that is quite extant, and obviously also the administrative capacities of Tipu Sultan, the fact that he was quite the internationalist in some ways, how do you sum him up? It's obviously a very complicated, complex character, and one can't sort of reduce him to one particular definition. So, what's his legacy really?
Yeah, he's truly a historian's enigma, and I'm still coming to, after these 900 pages, there are still elements of his life, his legacy, which I'm really trying hard to wrap my head around, because there's so many contradictions. You spoke about the bigotry. The Islamization of Mysore was complete, with even changing the name of the kingdom to Sarkar-e-Khudadad, or a God-given kingdom. Persian replaced Kannada and Marathi as court languages for maintaining accounts. He started minting his own coins. Even Hyder had his coins, but on the obverse of the coin he would have Hindu deities and so on, because he knew he was operating under constraints. But Tipu would brook none of that. So it was a Islamic coin with Arabic and Persian, in a Kannada speaking kingdom, that being the currency. And as you said, names of places changed. Mysore became Nazarabad, Calicut became Farrukhabad, all kinds of places names changed. And the several iconoclastic deeds that he did, and the tortures inflicted. I mean, Hyder also tortured those who outside Mysore, the Nayars and the Kodavas. But in Tipu's case, it becomes a double whammy, because along with political being their political opponent, there was also an element of theological sanction, and with the religious thing coming into picture, because he was constantly saying, I am going to crush the infidels. Even dead bodies being converted in Coorg. Not only the prisoners, but he also in his own letter he says the slain as well as the captured need to be converted to Islam through circumcision. So in the Kannada Christians in Mangalore, upwards of 40,000, 50,000 dragged all the way from Mangalore to Srirangpatna, many of them dying on the way, almost 27 churches being destroyed there. And we are in the week of Deepavali, and you have the Mandya Mayangars here who do not celebrate Diwali, because on that very day 700 men, women and children of this community were ruthlessly put to death by Tipu. And even now, after 200 to 250 years, the intergenerational trauma and memory remains in that community. The Nayars who bore the brunt of this, I have extensively documented all the temples and all the excesses that temples destroyed and excesses committed by him through his own letters. He gloats over it, so there is no scope for ambiguity. There are documented proofs of him talking about it, or his army commanders replying to him saying, we have carried out these excesses. Everything upwards of a lakh. In Calicut, he gloats that 4 lakh people have been converted to Islam. So this religious bigotry, this wanton kind of cruelty was inherent in his administration. So I would call him probably a feudal autocrat. But at the same time, I think he played a very, very important role in Indian history and in the history of British imperialism in India. And true credit to both father and son that it took the British 40 years to actually capture Mysore, and Mysore was the last kind of obstacle in the establishment of the British Raj. Richard Wellesley is called the the founding father of the British Raj, though he did not intend to be one. So the fall of Srirangapatna, that's why becomes such an important epoch in British history. It is valorized so much back in London, the afterlife of Tipu Sultan and its many representations. The British drummed this up, and rightly so. They had won a war after facing so many defeats from Mysore. So his thrust to several other things like the Mysore rockets, though there were rockets which were already in circulation, he improvised on this technology. There were iron casings instead of the wooden or paper rockets that were there, that made the rocket propel with a greater thrust and go a longer distance. And this caused a lot of destruction for his enemies, be it the Marathas or the British. So, and his fascination with science, with technology, constantly trying to, a very restless mind which always wanted to learn something new. He wanted to know how thermometers worked, how barometers and microscopes worked. Very interested in horticulture. You have the Lal Bagh gardens in Bangalore and in Srirangapatna too. Exquisite plants being brought all the way from there. Sericulture being given a lot of impetus, and as I said, Mysorean products and commerce finding markets outside India. All these are also elements of his legacy, but it is prefaced or
Right.
the underlying foundation of that is a very, very difficult social report card,
So very quick.
which we cannot ignore
Yeah.
when we look at a holistic legacy of a person.
So very quickly, because we are coming to the end of our time, Vikram Sampath, do you think he deserves a Jayanti? This is a big conversational point that comes up every year, becomes now quite the fodder for news channels as well as politicians, etc. What do you think on this?
This wades into the world of politics, Rahul, and I don't belong to that at all, nor do I wish to. But as a common person and as a historian, my opinion on this would be, if a group of people, individuals, they form a Tipu Sultan fan club or something and celebrate his death day, birthday, it is perfectly fine. But for a democratically elected government of a country like India, where in 1947 we turned our backs on princely states for a reason, that we wanted to be a modern democracy. For us to go back, use taxpayers' money to actually eulogize someone like this who had, as I said, a very disturbing social report card, where it is not a thing of the past. You have those living memories and trauma even to this day. When the Jayanti was announced by the Siddaramaiah government in 2015, you had Section 144 had to be imposed to celebrate it. 2 people were killed in firing in Coorg. The Kodavas, the Christians of Mangalore, the Nayars in Kerala, all these people went up in protest, and none of them had anything to do with the BJP or its politics. So the politics apart, when social memories and trauma is still rife, for a government to do that, I think that is a travesty. Individuals are free to do what they wish, whom they wish to eulogize, though I think someone needs to read his story in a holistic manner to even then decide, even individuals to decide whether you want to celebrate a person who has such a disturbing kind of past legacy attached to his name.
Well, thank you, Vikram Sampath, as always, engaging, always effusive, and always so easy with the words. Thank you so much, and your book, really a testament to your scholarship as well as your ability to tell an interesting story in an interesting manner. So thank you very much. It's been lovely speaking to you once again. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Rahul.